Today, you're going to be learning the Halloween Gambit. It starts off with the simple four knights game. Everybody's developing their knight. And then you play the move knight takes c5, sacrificing your knight on the fourth move. And let me tell you how deadly this is. Knight to f6 in this position is like you're going to see this move almost every time. And if you don't see knight f6, you're going to see bishop c5. And if they play bishop c5, you're still going to sacrifice your knight on e5 and then play d4. Now, after you go knight c3, knight f6, sacrifice your knight and then play d4, sometimes they pull their knight back to c6. That's actually not where the knight belongs because now we're able to play pawn d5. And once they move their knight to e5, we play pawn f4, and we're just going to be chasing the knights around the board. Once the knight goes back to g6, we play e5. And if you look on this knight, it has nowhere to go, which means the knight has to go back to the back rank. A lot of persons are going to play moves like queen to e7, thinking, okay, I'm not going to move my knight. I'm just going to pin your pawn. This is actually completely losing because now you're going to go queen to e2, same thing. And then they're going to be like, okay, he's threatening to take my knight, so the knight has to go back. And now you hit them with the move pawn to d6. And the reason why you play pawn to d6 is you hit the queen. The queen doesn't really have good squares to go. Once they take on d6, we don't take back. We hit them with knight to d5. And then once we attack the queen, we're also trying to fork. So they're going to pull the queen back thinking, okay, I defend against the fork. But now we still play knight c7, checking the king, hitting the rook. And then once the queen takes, pawn takes d6 is a discovered attack. We check the king, we win the queen, we win the game. But let's go back. What if after the knight moves and you play pawn to e5, he doesn't play queen to e7? What if he just decides to pull the knight back to b8? We're still going to play pawn to d6 here because after takes, we're now threatening to check, and anything they block with, we're just going to take the piece. So persons in this position, they usually move their queen out the way so that way they have two pieces attacking the d6 pawn, and that's where our main thematic move, knight b5, comes in. Because now we're threatening to fork, so he has to defend against the fork. And if he pulls the queen back, we fork and he loses the queen. So usually they play king to d8. After king to d8, we play bishop to e3. And now we're applying a lot of pressure to the a7 pawn. Now, if they think they're slick, and play the move pawn to a6, thinking, okay, let me get the knight out of my half off of the board, they're about to lose everything. Because not only are we going to check, forcing the king to move, and then play knight c7, which forks the rook and the king, once the king moves out the way, pulling the knight back to d5 wins the queen. But we're not going to take the queen just yet. We're going to take the rook, so it comes with check. The king has to move, put the knight back on c7, force the king to move, then knight d5, and we win the queen. And then once the king moves, we grab the queen, and we're just winning the game. That being said, the right thing to play against the Halloween is to put the knight on g6. If they put the knight on g6, now we play e5 and attack this knight. The knight still has nowhere to go. Knight still has to go back. Now we play bishop to c4. And in these types of positions, we're going to play moves like queen to f3 to attack f7, h4 followed by h5. The best move in this position is actually pawn to d5, which is very hard to see because they're just sacrificing back a pawn. And pawn c6, you pull the bishop back, and then you play with the same idea. I want you to watch this video, apply what I teach, go play some games, and your ratings will go through the roof. Kicking things off in the 500 region. Today we're going to be teaching you the Halloween gambit. After e5, we go knight f3, hit the pawn, he guards the pawn. Now we just play knight c3, just developing the other knight. And then the moment they play the move knight f6, we sacrifice the knight on e5. And this is the Halloween gambit. Now, after they take on e5, we're going to play the move pawn to d4. And our whole idea is to chase around the opponent's knights around the board. Knight to c6 is actually not the correct move because it's easier for them to lose the knight. But knight to g6 is usually the better move. Now, based on what I've been seeing, the lower rated guys don't really respond to the Halloween gambit well. Like, they usually just give back the knight very, very early on in the opening stage of the game. But let's see if this one is going to make it competitive. So knight back to c6 was played, but let's not bully them. He's only 500. Let's play pawn d5. We're all here to learn. So once we attack the knight, usually they put the knight back on e5. Knight to b8 or knight to e7 doesn't help either because we're going to play the move pawn to e5 and attack this knight. Well, the opponent decides to play knight to b4. Yeah, that's definitely not the score for the knight, bro. Like the knight does not belong on b4. But let's continue with our plan. Let's play pawn to e5. Let's attack the opponent's knight. And pawn to a3 would have also been a nice move. Queen to e7 here is surprisingly an interesting move because if I go queen to e2, then he could consider taking on d5. Bishop to g5 though could be just pinning the opponent's queen. Let's see what he plays. So queen to e7, that's a very nice move. I was thinking about queen d4, but that blunders the queen. I'm not able to move this pawn due to the pin. I'm also not able to play queen to e2 due to knight takes d5. So let's just play pawn to f4, guard the pawn. This knight is still not yet under attack. Pawn to d6 will also be very interesting. Just trying to apply as much pressure to my pin pawn. But after pawn d6, that's when I'm going to play a3. And then if he takes the pawn, I take the knight. And anytime you're playing the Halloween Gambit and you regain back the knight, then white will always just have a better position because black has to put themselves in some very compromising position in order to survive. So for right here, pawn d6, I'm going to play pawn to a3 and attack the opponent's knight on b4. Another very interesting move that my opponent could play is bishop to g4. But if bishop to g4, bishop to e2, bishop takes, and then I'm not going to play queen takes because of the same, well, queen takes, knight takes, then I'm going to be able to take the knight. So let's see. So he took on e5, and as we said, let's just take on b4. And taking on f4 is not a bad move because it comes with check. But once he take on f4, I'm going to block with the bishop and just try to run my king out the center as quickly as possible. What I've been noticing in these videos, the guys at the 500 level, like they play so strong. Like it's kind of weird. All right, so bishop to g4 was played. Okay, my queen is under attack. Offense is the best defense, obviously. So let's just go bishop to b5, check. This is actually a deep move, by the way, because even though my queen is under attack, pawn c6 is not as strong as it looks. Because after pawn c6, I'm actually able to take on c6. And if he takes my queen, I take on b7, and that's a check. And then once he responds to the check, I take the rook, get back my queen, and then I win the game. But the 500 guys, like there's just something about them. So pawn c6, let's take on c6. Let's see what he's going to play now. The move that I'm mostly afraid of is pawn takes f4 because it's a discovered attack on my king. Guy played pawn takes f4 without even thinking about it. Tell you about these 500 level players, man. It's like the 500 level players are better than 6, 7, 800, and then maybe 900 is better than 500. Okay, so now I have to move the king. Let's just keep up the trick. Let's go king f1. If he takes the queen, I take on b7 and I win the game. Um, I think I'm actually better here, though. I think I'm actually better here. I think white is just completely better here. But the opening was the opening was very competitive for me. Hmm. The guy played 94. Like it would have been best for you to at least take the queen and then be like, oh, I fell for the trick. One, you did not take the queen. Two, you blundered the bishop. Three, you still fell for the same trap that we spoke about. This is a discovered attack. By the way, the bishop checks the king, the pawn attacks the rook. The king is not able to move, so he has to block with the bishop. Is this going to be leading to a checkmate? Wait, bishop blocks? Oh my lord, this is a very nice checkmating tool. Look on this. We take the rook. That's a check, right? The bishop is not able to block due to the pin, which means the queen has to block. It's the only move that black has. But once the queen blocks, because the queen is pinned, I'm able to play the move queen takes d7, and that's just checkmate. But more Halloween Gambit against 600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 600, still gonna be doing some spooky stuff. Let's hit the pawn. He guards it. Let's play knight c3. And then once all the knights are out, That's when we play the Halloween Gambit. Now, he took our knight, so he is ahead by a knight. But now we're going to play the move pawn to d4, attacking the opponent's knight. Now the knight has to go back to g6. That's the correct score for the knight. Now we play pawn to e5, attacking the opponent's knight. And as you could see, the knight has no good forward moves. Since the knight has no good forward moves, it has to go back to b8. But players at the lower level, they usually just blunder their knight. So he pulls the knight back to b8. Let's go bishop c4. This is all the stuff that we looked on in the intro so far. And our whole idea is now to apply as much pressure to the pawn on f7. And the whole h4, h5 idea will help us. So pawn to f6 is a try. Remember, to take is a mistake. If we take on f6, his knight takes on f6, and we're just helping him. Instead, we're going to play the move queen to f3. Developing our queen, yes, but if he takes on e5, then it ends the game. Queen to e7 was played. Queen to e7 is decent. Because, well, wait, queen to e7 allows knight d5 though. That's kind of weird. Usually you don't put the queen on d7 if knight to d5 is an idea. Because the moment I play knight d5, he's going to be forced to pull the queen back to d8. I mean, if I take, there's knight takes though. So I don't want to rush it. If he takes, then knight d5, queen back, takes, check. I'm going to start by playing the move knight to d5, attacking the queen, because the queen definitely does not belong on the e7 square that quickly. So the queen has to go back to d8, by the way. So I know he's trying to apply pressure to my pin pawn, but the queen is under attack. He could try sacking the knight, but then I'm just going to take the knight. Yeah, he did sack the knight. I was expecting that because if I take his queen, he's going to take my queen. But let's just take the knight. That's fine. Now he has to take with the queen, I'm assuming. And things are about to get very interesting. Very, very interesting, I tell you. You notice how the guy's checking my king? And the natural thing to do is to block the check. But what am I going to do? Because I notice that the queen and the king is on the same line, instead, I'm going to play the move king. Wait. Wait, if king d1, queen d4, okay, it's actually a bit tricky because if king d1, there's queen d4, and I have to block. Yeah, that that actually doesn't work. So bishop e3, pawn c6, knight back c3. I mean, I got back the piece, but I thought king to d1, queen d4, block. Let's just play bishop to e3. I thought I was cooking something for a sec, but I'm not. Taking on b2, I'm never afraid of, because not only is c7 a bit more weak, I'm just going to castle my king and his pieces are not going to be developed. But as I'm saying is, you never want to, well, I mean, we're playing against, the lower rated guys. We're going to be getting more competitive games when we start climbing up in the ladder. But, well, actually, it's not the worst move. Because once I take queen b2 forks the knight, maybe he's cooking something. Let me stop underestimating this guy. If I take on b4, queen takes b2, which forks the rook and the knight. Nah, I'm gonna take it. I'm sure I have something. Like his king is just too weak for me not to have something. If he takes, I check. If knight block, knight d5, sack the rook, and then I'm gonna play king up. And if he takes the other rook, queen takes e7 is actually gonna be a checkmate. Apparently, he wasn't trying to cook anything. He just blundered, which means let me just get my king out the center of the board. And just like that, we're ahead by 2 points. It's the lower rated guys are just not managing the Halloween gambit. Okay, pawn to d5 attacks my knight. I'm thinking of playing knight d3 to hit the queen. There's also knight d5, just to trade the knights off the board so that way I'm able to put my rook on the same line as his king. Yeah, let's go with knight d5. I mean, I'm ahead in material anyways, which means I want to trade pieces off the board. And if he plays pawn c6 or something like that being slick, I'm able to go bishop f4 and knight c7 is also going to be a fork. So he did play the move pawn to c6, but as we know, offense is the best defense. And the fact that his queen is in the center of the board, exposed, vulnerable, we hit him with the move bishop to f4. So not only does it allow me to play knight c7, which just forks the king and the rook, I'm now able to play moves like rook to e1, which applies more pressure to this knight. I'm probably going to take the knight and then play rook e1, to be honest. Like, if I go for the rook, then I'm going to be ahead by a rook. But if I take the knight, she's probably going to be getting checkmated. And I didn't even check to see if the guy's queen was trapped. I think his queen is also getting trapped here. Like, yeah, as I said, like, the low rated guys, maybe between 5 to 1,000, those games are not going to be competitive because once we play the moves that clearly targets f7, they're gonna lose. But after that, you guys are gonna see some more competitive games. So just bear with me. So he decides to play the move queen to f5, and this is what I'm saying. Like, the queen is not unprotected. But how do we make the queen unprotected? We take the knight. The whole idea of taking the knight is not necessarily to trade. Now the queen is an unprotected piece, and the queen is on the same line as my queen, which means we're able to do a discovered attack. That's a check, which means the opponent's king has to react to it. Then we take the queen, and we're just completely winning the game. So he moves the king, we grab the queen, and this is now just GG's. Like, the opponent resigns. More Halloween against 700 players. Stick around. The opponent is now 700. Let me show you guys some more Halloween Gambit. So as we said, e5, we hit the pawn. They guard the pawn. Everything is natural. You develop one of your knights, and naturally they're going to develop their other knight. And now you're going to sacrifice your knight on e5. And this is where the surprise comes in. Now the knight decides to take on e5. You hit them with pawn to d4. And the whole idea from here is you're just going to be paralyzing their position. The opponent decides to play the move knight g6. Now we play pawn e5, hit the knight. And keep in mind, knight had to go back to g8. Now we play bishop to c4, and pawn to d5 is the best move. The opponent is, this 700 is playing all the best move. Look like he came prepared. But let's take on d5. Pawn c6 is now the best move after this. Okay, knight to e7 is decent. I lost a game when someone plays knight to e7, but I'm just going to play bishop to g5 here, just pinning the knight on e7. Let's see what he plays here. Now, pawn to c6 was played to attack my bishop. So, okay, I have to move the bishop. The question is where? We're not going to sack the bishop. Bishop e4 is very interesting. But I just like the idea of maintaining the pressure on f7. So let's just maintain the pressure on f7. Pawn h6, I'm kind of scared about pawn h6. If pawn h6, I'm probably going to just get rid of that. No. If pawn h6, maybe queen to f3, and if he takes, I take with check. But then the king runs to d7. It's tricky. It's actually very tricky. But it's the Halloween gambit, That's how it works. So h6 was played, and bishop back loses the bishop. Bishop here loses the bishop. Bishop e3 is probably what I'm going to play. It's kind of like a passive move, though. Queen h5 actually doesn't work because the knight guards the rook. So queen f3, if he takes, check, king up. Okay, guys, please bear with me. I'm going to play the move queen f3. I'm sacrificing another piece, and I'm not gonna act as if I'm seeing a checkmate here. I'm not seeing the mate. All I'm saying is if he takes my bishop and I take on f7 and he moves his king, pawn to d5 will hunt his king, and his king is gonna be on the run. That's all I'm saying. So, so let's see what move he plays to defend against this. I think he needs to take the bishop though, but this is gonna be the hardest position to defend against. There was also the obvious. There was knight e4, which threatens knight d6. That would have been the move, obviously. So he took the pawn. Let's take on f7. We can't back down now. And then once the king moves, then I'll play pawn to d5. Moving this pawn doesn't really give much. So knight e4 threatens knight here, but then the king is gonna run. So let's play pawn to d5. I'm trying to open the position basically because his king is in the center. He's now ahead by 3 points, but keep in mind, whenever we sacrifice a piece, we're taking his pawns, which means the moment we win back one of our pieces, he's going to be down by a lot of points. So he decides to play the move knight takes e5. And okay, he gave me back the knight that I sacrificed because the king is exposed, the knight is unprotected. A move like queen to e6 just wins back the knight because now the king has to move. I'm assuming he's going to play king to c7, and then I'm just going to take the knight on e5, and I'm not going to be down by 4 points anymore. So he moves the king to e8. That's surprising because he actively decided to make the decision to keep his king in the center of the board. Let's just take on e5. It's funny. He was playing all the best moves against the Halloween, and once I hit him with bishop to g5, that's when he crumbled. Knight e7 is not the best move there, by the way. It's pawn c6. So he's ahead by 1 point, but pawn to d6 threatens to win the knight. Queen takes g5 threatens to win a free pawn. If he takes, I'm likely going to take on d5, seeing that his knight is pinned. I like the idea of just castling to put my rook on the same line as his queen, though. So he plays bishop to d7, and it's like he gave back the pieces back to back because now the queen is pinning the knight. And because I'm pinning the knight, just pawn to d6. This is just PP on the PP. We're applying pressure to the pinned knight, which means once I take the knight, the minor pieces are going to be equal. But remember, I took a lot of pawns. So I'm going to be ahead by at least 2 pawns. So he moves his rook to c8, and I'm not going to be taking the knight just yet, because then if I takes, there's queen takes. I like the idea of knight e4. So if takes, queen takes, check, king over, I win the rook or I fork. But the principal thing to do is to castle the king. So let's get the king out the center of the board, putting my rook on the same line as his queen. Remember, whenever a piece is pinned, don't be in a rush to take it until the opponent actively try to get out of the pin. So unless he finds a way to move his king or attack my queen or do something, I'm never going to take the knight because the knight is just pinned. I'm going to play moves like rook e1, apply more pressure to the pinned knight, or knight e4 with ideas of knight g5 and bishop f7 mate. So he plays queen to b6, still did not try to get out of the pin. I mean, if I takes, bishop takes, doesn't really do much. So I'm going to play rook to e1, applying even more pressure to that knight, which means the moment I take his knight, he's going to be losing his bishop because he's not going to be able to take due to the mate. So he decides to pull the queen back to d1, and again, we're not going to do it. Don't do it. If you take bishop takes, don't really gain much. So let's play the move knight to e4. What I want to do is I want to be able to take on g5, then checkmate on f7. Or once I take on e7 and he takes with the bishop, knight d6, and that's a fork. I want more than just taking the knight. Like this, I really want this to be a valuable lesson for you guys. Like I have a lot of students who, the moment they pin something, they just take the piece. Don't take the piece until the opponent makes an effort to get out of the pin. Remember what we said, the threat is better than the execution. So bishop to g5 was played. Okay, he moves the bishop away. And okay, now if I takes, queen takes, knight check, king has to go here. Then I take the rook with check. King has to take. But what if I just take on g5? If I take on g5, he takes my rook, check, king goes here, and that's just a checkmate. You see, I tell you guys, the threat is better than the execution. He's not even able to take my rook due to checkmate in 2 moves. I mean, he's gonna lose. He has no time on the clock. Might as well he take my rook. He decides to take the rook, and this is now just checkmate in 2 moves. We check on f7. The king now has to go to d7, and that's just checkmate. More Halloween Gambit against 800 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 800. We're going to be playing some Halloween Gambit. Let's hit the pawn. He guards it. Take out the other knight. He takes out the other knight, surprise them with the Halloween Gambit, and we're basically sacrificing a knight on the 4th move. So he thought about it, but he took the knight. Let's go d4. Same thing. From here, we're just going to be chasing the opponent's knights around the board. Now, knight to g6 is usually the correct move here. Knight to c6 is like a sign of, okay, let me just pull my knight back to c6. It's the natural move, but it's not the correct move. The guy played bishop before. He doesn't want any part of it. The guy just gave me back the piece. Now, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind is whenever they give back if they willingly give back the knight, they're actually just completely losing. If you win back the knight, you're going to be ahead by a pawn and you're going to be slightly better. For example, here let's just take on e4 and attack his knight. Taking on c3 followed by taking on e4 is completely losing. Knight takes e4 is actually one of the ways to try to get a little edge. And there's two interesting move here. There's queen to g4 and there's queen to d4. I think queen to d4 is the correct move, but queen to g4 is the interesting move. Now, if I play queen to g4, there's knight takes c3, and then queen takes c3, but then the knight goes back to d5. So let's actually play queen to d4. We're basically attacking both the knight and the bishop at the same time. You know, one may call this a fork, which means he has to take something on c3. So maybe he's going to take with his knight. I hit the bishop. Bishop has to move. Or he takes with the bishop, I take back, then the knight is going to be under attack. So he decided to take with the bishop. Let's just take back. Now his knight is under attack. Pawn to d5 is something. That's all I have to say. Pawn to d5 is something. If I en passant, oh, pawn to d5 is nothing. Because if d5 and I en passant and then knight takes, the g7 pawn is going to be hanging. With that being said, where is he going to put the knight? Maybe f5. Yeah, pawn to f5 is something. Okay, it wasn't pawn to d5, bro, because now once he plays pawn to d5, we en passant, which means the knight is now unprotected. And you're not gonna, yeah, so he took with the knight. That's what I was expecting. But now his pawn on g7 is an unprotected pawn. So we take the pawn. And anytime you're able to take a pawn on g7, this is not just Halloween Gambit. Anytime you're able to take a pawn on g7 and you're attacking the opponent's rook, and the only square that the rook is able to go to is the f8 square, then you're actually just completely winning. God, the guy played queen to d7. Queen to d7, I'm sure that was a slip. Wasn't he trying to at least check the king? Well, if he had played rook to f8, I would have played bishop h6, then take the rook. But he decided to give me the rook for free. So, I'll take it, I'll take it. Halloween is about gifting, and now he's about to get checkmated. Because after king to e7, I'm going to hit him with bishop to g5 check. Well, if king e6, queen f6, king d5, not seeing the mate. But if pawn f6, then there's queen takes f6, king e8, still not seeing the mate. And I'm sure someone who is watching this is seeing the mate. Like every time I post these videos, persons are always pointing out some checkmates that I missed. So I'm trying my best to see everything. So king to f6, right? Queen f6, king d5, castle, and it's a check. He moves. What if I castle first, though? Check, here, check, moves. He's running. So let's castle first. Remember, the threat is better than the execution. So now I'm threatening a checkmate on f6. If he moves the knight to prevent the mate, he loses the queen, and the queen is not able to defend the mate on the dark square. So he decides to play queen to a5, which is all right because it allows his king to run to the d7 square. With that being said, let's continue with the plan. Let's play queen to f6 check. The king now has to go to d7. And once the king goes to d7, trying to find my mate. Okay, what I'm seeing is the fact that the rook is on the same line as the king, which means queen takes f7 check is just a free pawn. Now his king is forced to move. And I'm going to swing my queen back to d5 with check. King is forced to move again. If the king goes back to d7, then he loses his queen because the queen and the king is going to be on the same diagonal, which means bishop to b5 check wins the queen. And the knight does not guard the b5 square because the knight is going to be pinned the entire time, which means he has to play king to b6, but he plays king back to d7, which means bishop to b5 is just a very nice fork. The knight will never be able to take part in what's happening. So he took with the queen. Let's take with the queen. That's a check. Assuming he's going to block with the pawn. Now the knight is really going to be pinned. And what do we do when a piece is pinned? PP on the PP. Now we have two pieces attacking the knight. And this is where we conclude the game. So the king moves. If I takes king up, then I check. King moves. I don't want all of that drama. So let's try again. The threat is better than the execution. Before we take the knight, let's play bishop to e3, protecting the b6 square. Then we're going to be taking on d6 next move. Bishop moves to g4. Let's grab the knight. The king now has to go to c8. And that's just checkmate. More Halloween against 900 rated players. Stick around. Opponent is now 900. Let's play some more Halloween Gambit. Let's hit the pawn. He guards it. Bring out the third knight. He brings out his knight. Then we sacrifice the knight on e5. Now he takes on e5. We're going to play the move pawn to d4. And from here, it's just a matter of chasing the knights around the board. Like some persons are going to try to give back the knight. Knight g4 is actually one of the quickest way to lose the knight, because if you notice, this knight on f6 is the main defender of this knight on g4. So all I'm going to do here is just play the move pawn to e5, and this is just a removing the guard tactic, because I'm threatening to take the knight on f6. If the knight on f6 moves, this is actually pretty funny. Like, not only did he lost this knight, but he moves the knight to an unprotected square. So I'm going to choose, which knight should I take actually? Let's take the knight on d5, because this one is still under attack. So we already got back our knight, which means we're now ahead by 1 point. He pulls the knight back to h6. Yeah, this is definitely gonna be one of those games. Because look on this. I want you guys to notice this f6 square. That's where I would like to put my knight. But the pawn on g7 covers the f6 square. And that's why I'm going to be taking on h6, giving up my bishop for a knight. But it's gonna be leaving his f6 square weak, which means once I hit him with knight to f6 check, the king now has to go to e7. So not only am I ahead by a pawn, the king is also exposed. I got everything that I needed from the position. So from here, all I need to do is finish my development. So let's just put the queen on h5 this time around. Queen f3 should also be fine, but I'm just trying to get my king out the center as quickly as possible. Bishop to g7 was played. Okay, he's applying some pressure to my knight, but we don't care. Let's just continue with our development. Let's go bishop c4. We're now targeting the pawn on f7, which means, I mean, taking the knight will always be bad, but if he decides to take the knight here, he's actually going to be getting checkmated on move 11. He didn't get checkmated on move 11. He decides to defend the f7 square with his rook. But because I have two pieces attacking f7 and he has one rook guarding f7, we're not going to be doing a removing the guard tactic. And that's how knight takes h7 comes in. Because the rook was guarding this pawn, it's no longer guarding the pawn, which means I should be able to take the rook on the next move. Pawn to d5 was actually what I thought he had, but if he plays pawn d5, I'm able to en passant and then take his rook. So he decides to play pawn to d6 instead, which didn't really change much. I'm actually thinking of just taking on d6. And then if he takes with the queen, then I take the rook. And I'm trying to open the position anyway, so let's just take on d6 with check. He needs to take with the pawn, by the way. He saw that he needed to take with the pawn. So now let's just get rid of the rook. I'm still threatening to take on f7, so he had to take with the queen. Now I'm going to simply get my king out the center of the board, guarding my pawn. This rook is coming in the game, and we're ahead by 4 points. It's over now. So the king went back to d8. That's a free pawn, by the way, because the king was guarding f7. It's no longer guarding f7, which means I have two attackers. He only has one defender. So let's just take the free pawn. Rook to e1 followed by rook to e8 is now the plan, because the king and the queen is now sitting on the same rank. So bishop to d7 was played. It's a good move. He's developing his bishop. Let's go rook to e1. We still have to get all our pieces in the game regardless. I'm thinking about this queen a5 check, but I don't want to do this check, because once he plays pawn b6, my bishop is going to be unprotected. Unless I'm able to put the queen back on d5, attack his rook, and protect my bishop at the same time. But now that he plays rook to c8, then that plan is out the window. So how do I continue from here? Bishop e8, if he takes, I take. That's losing. Queen a5, if pawn b6, I don't see what that gives me, to be honest. So I'm actually going to play one of those regular moves. Yeah, let's just play bishop to e6. Let's get some pieces off the board. We're ahead by 5 points. Okay, that's not a bad move. It's not like he's being greedy and pawn grabbing. He's actually threatening a checkmate, so I have to be careful. Luckily, I'm able to play the move rook to e2 because the queen covers the e2 square. And it's one of those offense is the best defense type of move. So rook e2 hits the queen. He needs to check. Then I play king b1. And then if he takes, I takes. And I should be completely safe in that position. So let's go rook to e2. So he pulls the queen all the way back to f8. And now I'm just trying to get some pieces off the board. So let's just take on e7. I'm still going to be ahead by 4 points. And then after he plays king takes, I like the idea of queen to b5 check, checking the king, hitting the pawn on b7. And maybe I'm also going to double up my rooks on the e file. Okay, the king decides to move to e8. That's a free pawn, by the way. But what if I play rook to e1 now? I'm going to be threatening rook to e8, which could potentially win his queen. So again, whenever you see a good move, still trying to look for a better one. Rook to e8 is now the threat. So if he's not careful, he's going to lose that queen. Okay, he was a bit careful, but it's one of those moments where you jump out of the frying pan and then jump in the something like that. But basically, what I'm trying to say is, once the king goes to c7, this is like checkmate in 2 or mate in 3 if he decides to sack his queen. But once I check and the king goes back, that's gonna be a mate. If the king goes here, that's gonna be a mate. And if he sacks the queen, I do the same thing, and it's gonna be the same type of mate. He sacked the queen. Let's just grab the queen, which means that's just a checkmate. More Halloween Gambit against 1,000 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,000. Let's do some Halloween Gambit. E5, let's hit the pawn, guards the pawn, knight c3, 3 knights game. He develops the knight, 4 knights game, the knight on e5. Okay, he immediately took on e5. Let's hit him with d4, forcing this knight to move. The knight went back to g6. And then, as we said, the move that we're going to play here is pawn to e5. The knight went back to g8. All of these are like only moves. Like black has to play these moves. And then we play bishop c4, pinning. Well, it's not necessarily pinning, but I'm applying a lot of pressure to this f7 square. Bishop to b4 was played. Okay, now he's pinning my knight to my king. But let's continue with the main thematic idea. Queen to f3, attack the f7 square. And then he plays immediate queen to e7. And I'm thinking about playing the move pawn to h4 here. Because pawn to h4 threatens to chase away his knight. I mean, if he takes, maybe I sack my rook. Bishop to g5 could also be a very nice idea. Go with h4. It's very thematic stuff. The plan is just to chase away the knight from h5. And there's a lot of times when they try to take on h5 and we sack the rook, he immediately decided to give up his bishop for a knight. Very weird move, by the way. Let's just take on c3. I'm still trying to play pawn to h5 and attack his knight. And now that he decides to give up his bishop, if he had taken on h4, then I sack the rook. So he decides to play the move pawn to h5. Now here's the move that I'm about to play. Keep in mind, I want to play bishop to g5 because this is like a removing the guard tactic. Bishop g5 hits the queen, and if the queen moves, I take on f7. The thing is, however, if I play bishop g5, he has f6, and then I'm not able to take due to the pin, and that's why I'm going to play king to f1. This is the Halloween Gambit. These are the types of moves that you play when you're playing the Halloween Gambit. Now that he plays pawn to d6, I'm not only am I able to play bishop to g5 and hit the queen, but my rook on e1 is going to be able to easily swing over to, well, on a1 is going to be able to swing to e1. Isn't this losing already? I mean, pawn to f6. Okay, I'm going to take one of those pawns. I'm thinking of taking the d pawn, but then he plays queen takes, which is why I'm going to take the f pawn. So anything that he decides to take back with, rook to e1, pins the queen, wins the queen. So what is he going to play here? He's in trouble. He's in big trouble. Okay, he plays bishop to g4. I mean, he's trying to be a bit creative. He's like, bro, if you take my queen, I take your queen. First of all, he's only ahead by 1 point. If I take his queen, he takes my queen. I take his bishop. I got back my piece. But we're playing the Halloween Gambit. We want more than just an equal position. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to hit him with queen takes b7 because the bishop going to b4 left the pawn on b7 unprotected. Now his rook is unprotected and under attack, and this queen is also under attack. How is he going to save his queen, save his rook, and prevent rook to e1 at the same time? Things are getting very spooky for him. So he decides to take on f6. First of all, that's a rook, that's a queen. And what do I really want here? A queen is 9 points. So if I get a queen, lose a rook, I get 4 points. But if I take an entire rook, that's 5 points. You see, that's how you need to be thinking about it. So king to d7 was played. Now we're going for the king. Now we're looking for the forcing moves. Hit him with bishop to b5 check. If he blocks, queen takes, he's gonna lose. The king is not able to go back, which means the king has to step in front of the queen. Then rook to e1 wins the queen regardless. So once he plays king to e6, rook to e1 moves the king, grab the queen, and he's probably gonna resign. Okay, so he decides to play the move pawn to c6. He doesn't want to put his king here. So if I play bishop takes, if he plays king here, I'm still gonna take. If I play queen takes, the king has to go back. Wait, bishop takes, queen, king c7, queen b7, king goes back to d8, queen to c8, but then he's able to block with the bishop. Okay, hopefully I'm not missing a mate because you guys are always telling me that I'm missing stuff, and then it's always embarrassing when I check the game. Okay, so check, king here. Let's just take with the bishop. If he goes here, I play here, and if the king goes to c7, it's either queen b7 or rook to e1. I need to be very careful. Well, the king went to e7. He makes it very easier for me. Rook to e1 check. King now has to move. We grab the queen. We win the game. Oh, there's knight e5. There is knight e5. But let's just take the knight. I mean, the queen and the king is still on the same line. He takes back the pawn. We're now ahead by 7 points. I'm trying not to miss a checkmate because you guys are too sharp in the comments. So bishop to d5 check. Maybe. Sack the rook, but there's king takes. Okay, I'm going to start with bishop to d5 check because I don't want his king escaping back to f7. So if he decides to put his king on f5, then bishop to e4 is going to be a checkmate. If he puts his king back on d7, maybe I'm just going to take the free pawn. Like, I don't really need to rush to checkmate him here. I'm just ahead by so many points. Plus, if he moves the king, that's a free knight. So the question is, do we take the free knight? It's not really free because he's also going to take my bishop. Or do we try to go for some checkmates? Like check here, king has to move. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play rook to b1. That's not a free bishop. If he decides to take my bishop, then he's going to really lose his queen. Okay, he took the bishop. Let's give a check. King has to move. We grab the queen. And okay, now it's just GG's. Unless I have a checkmate. King here, check. No, let's just grab the queen. Let's just grab the queen. If he takes with the knight, he loses the rook. He takes with the king, so that's also just a free knight. We're now ahead by 11 points of material. And the opponent resigns. More Halloween against 1100 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1100. Let's go e4. E5 was played. Let's hit the knight. We're still trying to do some Halloween gambit. Knight c6, we take out the other knight. And once they play knight f6, we sack the knight on e4. And yeah, this is going to be surprising everyone. Like they think about it before they take the knight. And if they don't take the knight, then we just won ourselves a free pawn. So the knight, now we play the move pawn to d4. And from here, we're just going to be chasing the opponent's knight around the board. So knight going back to c6 is not the ideal score for the knight. Let's play pawn d5, hit the knight, force the knight to move again. And then once the knight goes back to e5, we play f4, forcing the knight to move again. Knight back to g6, we don't stop. Now we play e5. Now this knight basically has nowhere to move forward, so it has to go back to g8. And this is where the fun line begins. From here, our whole game plan is to dominate the dark squares by playing moves like pawn to d6. Okay, queen to... That's not it, bro. Queen to h4 is not hit. It doesn't do anything. Like once I play pawn to g3, the queen just has to go all the way back to d8. And why did you play queen h4? Just to put the queen back on d8. I basically got an extra move. So the queen went back to d8 and Remember the move knight to b5. Never forget about this knight b5 idea. We're basically gonna be forking him on c7. Like there's nothing he could do. Like he's gonna take, we're gonna take back, still gonna get forked. Usually it's takes queen b6, but yeah, that should not help. Okay, that's very interesting. Like bishop couldn't move, knight could, none of the knights couldn't move. He decided to sacrifice the bishop. So let's just take the bishop. If he plays c6, he still gets forked though. So he still has to be careful. If he plays pawn takes, I'm thinking about queen takes, but he's going to be able to check, which means if he plays pawn takes, I'm just going to play knight takes. And once he moves the king, maybe just bishop to c4. And one thing I like to remind you guys about is once they give us back the material, then we're just going to be better. And usually we're ahead by a pawn. No, I'm not ahead by a pawn, but white is just better. So he took, let's take on d6 with check. The king now has to move to f8. I mean, king e7 would be weird. And that's when I'm going to go bishop to c4. And I'm basically trying to fork on f7 as well. Queen to, I was expecting queen to e7 check. I was expecting that move. And the move I had prepared for that was king to f2. And the reason why I'm choosing f2 for the king is so that way I'm able to swing the rook over to e1 and attack the queen. And depending on where the queen goes, he's either going to be losing the queen or getting checkmated on the back rank. So black is already busted here. For example, knight a6 unfortunately does not help. So knight g4 is a check. Remember, always ensure that you're aware of the opponent's check. But I'm still going to play rook e1. It's over. The queen has nowhere to go. It's like the queen has to go back to d8. Yeah, that's what I needed to say. The queen has to go back to d8. If he checks, I'm not going to take because he's going to take and then it's going to be okay for him. But once he checks, I'm just going to move the king. And then the knight is going to be hanging. The queen is going to be hanging. Now, I'm trying to be a bit fancy. Like things usually, like if you're playing this position and someone plays queen d8, just play rook e8 and win the queen. But I'm trying to be fancy. I'm wondering if I'm able to play. Oh, the guy played 90. That doesn't help, bro. I'm still gonna take with the rook. Like maybe he expected me to take with. Oh no, I blundered. I'm so cocky. Now he's able to play knight g4. Because then if queen takes, there's queen takes. I'm so cocky. I should have just played pawn takes. So knight g4. All right, let's lock in. Let's lock in. Queen takes g4. Queen takes d6. I was about to say swing the rook in the game. I don't even have the rook. Um. mm. Okay. Do I just move takes? Queen g4. Queen d6. Queen back to e2. Queen back to e2 threatens mate on the back rank. So maybe he has pawn to g6. Damn, this is embarrassing. So takes. Okay, I already messed up. Let's just take like don't be cocky. Like don't be cocky. I should have just took the free knight with the pawn, but no, I wanted to be cocky. No once he takes. I mean, I'm still gonna be ahead by a piece, but I still messed up the position. What I'm gonna do now though is develop my bishop to e3. And that's because the queen and the king is on the same line. He still has to be a bit careful here because once I hit him with a move like bishop to okay, he plays f6. Let's get cocky again. That was not good, sir. Because the queen and the king is on the same line, I was about to say bishop to c5 just pins the queen to the king. So I'm assuming he's gonna take my rook. I'm gonna take his queen. That's gonna lead to a checkmate, which means he kind of has to take the bishop, and then I'm gonna take. So taking the rook is just gonna lead to a mate. We take the queen with check, and e8 is the only score for the king. Where's my mate? Okay, let's just take here. Yeah, once we take on g7, we attack the unprotected rook, and we're also threatening to play queen to e7 checkmate. There's nothing in which black could do here. He decides to move the king out the way, but it doesn't help. Taking the rook is a checkmate, but that's also checkmate. More Halloween against 1200 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1200. Let's go e4, hit the pawn. He guards it, bring out the other knight. And once all four knight comes out, sat the knight on e5, Halloween gambit. He took on e5, pawn to d4, chasing the knight away. The knight went back to g6. Now, you're going to see more people pulling their knight back on g6 because it's better than knight back to c6, but we're still going to be playing the move pawn to e5, hit the knight, and then from there, the knight just has to go back to g8. So he pulls the knight back to g8. Let's go bishop c4. Let's target f7. Queen to f3 is going to be your next move. Okay. The guy played f6 though. Isn't that like a forbidden move? Okay, first of all, if someone plays f6, we're not gonna take on f6 because it helps his knight to be developed. I'm thinking of queen f3, but that's hope chess. Like the guy's not gonna take on e5 and allow me to checkmate him. So h4, if he takes h5, I like f4. f4, if he takes, then I take. And then once I castle, my rook also gets the file. And if he checks pawn g3, and I should be safe. Let's go with f4 here. Pawn to d6 was played. Okay. Well, the opponent is trying to open the center of the board, which is not smart because his king is in the center of the board. Pawn to f5 doesn't work because the bishop guards. I don't want to take and help his knight. I don't want to take and help his bishop. So let's just get our king out the center of the board. If he takes on e5, I'm just going to take back on e5. My rook gets the e file. I have a lot of active pieces. What I don't have, though, is my knight. But he took with the d pawn. I'll take with the f pawn. And okay, I'm not expecting him to take with the f pawn. But if he takes with the f pawn, it's just bad. Like bishop f7, and then his king is just going to be on the run. So bishop to b4 was played instead. You know, he's trying to get as many pieces out. He's trying to trade the pieces off the board. I mean, I like knight to d5 here because, first of all, I don't want to trade. I'm down by 2 points. So I'm assuming he's going to be giving up his bishop for the knight, though. But that's kind of like hope chess. Like, if I play bishop e3, a simple development move, he's probably going to give up the bishop for a knight. But let's always assume that the opponent is going to play the best move. Let's hit him with knight b5, attack the unprotected bishop. But I'm also applying a lot of pressure to f6. No, I like taking on f6 because if he takes with the knight, bishop g5 pins the knight, and then I'm already applying pressure to the knight. Yeah, things could get crazy. And that's the thing about the Halloween gambit. Like, if you put this in the computer is gonna be like, black is not losing. Black has to do this, and then the position is drawn. A 1200 player is not gonna be thinking like Stockfish. So he pulls the bishop back to e7. How do we continue with our attack? If I takes, there's knight takes, and then if I takes, bishop takes, maybe rook check. I like the idea of just playing queen to e2 though, putting my queen on the same line as the king, and if pawn c6, I take on f6, and then things could get weird. Let's go with that. Let's go queen e2. Like playing the Halloween gambit, you have to be quick with getting all your pieces in the game. Like, and remember, we're not necessarily trying to be like, okay, let's win the game right now. We don't necessarily have to win the game right now. Because even though we're down by a knight, I want you guys to really think about it logically. I have one, two, three, four active pieces. What are his pieces doing? Okay, bishop to e6. Decent move. First of all, okay, I lied. I think I just lied to you guys. I'm so sorry. That was not a decent move. Because I was about to say takes, 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 and I'm only getting a pawn. But who plays the Halloween gambit if you want a pawn? Why not just take on f6, hit the unprotected bishop? If the bishop takes on d5, I take on g7, and I'm just gonna win the rook. I'm gonna have two queens on the board. And if he doesn't do anything, I'm just gonna take the unprotected bishop. You're not Stockfish, bro. Like Stockfish may tells you, Stockfish may be like, the Halloween gambit is not good. This is how you refute it. But you're not Stockfish. It's over now. Things are looking very spooky for my guy now. Okay, so he did decide to make the decision to take. And we're gonna make the decision to take on G7. How are you gonna prevent me from taking your rook, sir? It's I want to say it's tricky. I don't want to say it's tricky. Like if he takes hit my queen, I'm thinking about taking his rook, give him the queen, take the knight. But if he takes hit my queen, why don't I just take? And then if bishop f6, yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. What should I play after bishop f6? Okay, so here's the deal. Let's take on it. I think taking on c4 makes the most sense. He's ahead by 3 points, by the way, but he's about to lose his rook. Bishop to f6 is the only move that, okay, I'm going to take the. Oh no, I lied again. Sorry for lying, guys. If he plays bishop to f6 and I take the rook and the bishop takes, his knight is hanging. No, I lied again. If bishop f6 and I take the rook and he takes my queen, queen f7 is mate. It's over. We're 15 moves into the Halloween gambit, but it's over. It's over. Okay, so he decides to play the move knight to f6, and now we're just gonna grab the rook, right? I mean, there's no other good check, so let's just grab the rook. Knight takes h7 is the only move, and then I'm just gonna develop my bishop to g5. So knight takes h8 was played. I'm now ahead by 1 point, and then queen b5 grab the pawn is something. But let's continue with the whole idea of getting all our pieces in the game. So bishop to g5, apply some pressure to the knight. I want to play rook a to e1, so all my pieces joins the game. Queen to d6 makes some sense. He's trying to get his king out the center of the board. The thing is, though, if I takes and then the bishop takes, the knight no longer guards the g8 square. So I'm able to hit him with queen to g8. Let's take here. Well, I'm also thinking of rook to e1 check, to be honest. Like, I'm not sure which one of them makes the most sense, but let's think about it. If he takes, I check, blocks with the queen, grab the queen, take the bishop, and I'm winning, but just ahead by an exchange. If I check, however, if I check king f8, okay, rook e6, rook e6. Wait, if I check king d7, queen b5 check, blocks with the queen, queen f5 check. I think the move is let's think. I think the move is queen g8, to be honest. Like, I think the move is queen g8. And then I'm gonna play rook to e1 after he decides to block with the queen. If he decides to move the king out the way, then okay, we're just gonna take a rook and win the game. So he moves the king out the way. There's no checks that do anything fancy. So let's just grab the rook. He's able to take my pawn on d4 with check, but I'm just gonna move the king out the way. So he checks. Let's move the king. We're now ahead by 5 points. Plus his bishop, his queen, and his king is on the same line. So rook to d1 is also coming up next. And he took a pawn. Let's hit him with rook to d1, pinning the queen to the king. And I'm assuming he's going to pull the bishop back to d4. But what do we do when a piece is pinned? Let's wait on him to pull the bishop back to d4. Oh, he sacked the queen. Let's just take. Now it's GG's. And the opponent resigns. More Halloween Gambit against 1,300 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,300. e5, we hit the pawn. He guards the pawn, knight c3, three knights game. He plays the four knights game. Welcome to the Halloween Gambit. So once he takes, we play pawn to d4. And then from here, our plan is just to chase the opponent's pieces around the board. Okay, he decides to play bishop to d6. This guy just decides to give back the knight. So let's just take the knight. And then after bishop takes, the position is basically equal from here. Like, he doesn't want all the drama. Okay, how do we do this? Bishop c4, takes, knight takes. Yeah, let's go bishop c4, targeting his f7 pawn. I'm expecting him to castle, and then I'm also going to get castled. Okay, pawn to h6 is not bad. He's preventing my bishop from going to the g5 square. Let me just use the time to get my king out the center of the board, assuming he's also going to get his king out the center of the board. And then I'm just going to continue with our normal development. Okay, pawn d6 was played. All right, he's not getting castled. What if I play knight d5? Knight d5, knight d5, queen d5. Okay, but then he's going to castle at that point. Pawn f4 forces him to give up his bishop for the knight, and then he's not able to play knight takes because of queen d5. Yeah, let's go pawn f4. Pawn f4 is bishop is kind of trapped. Like, he's not going to lose the bishop, but he has to give up the bishop for the knight. So once he takes, let's just take back. Yes, we have double pawns, but we also have the bishop here. And the bishop here could be very, very dangerous. Okay, now I'm expecting him to castle. Like, are you not gonna castle your king, bro? Well, if he castles the king, I like the idea of, okay, yeah, that's also fine. That's also fine. No need to castle if you're gonna play that move. But the thing is, h3 will allow me to start chasing your bishop. So here's what I'm going to do. My pawn here is under attack. So the best way to guard the pawn is to play queen to d4. You know, it's a very active way to protect the pawn. And now I'm assuming he's finally going to castle his king. I'm giving him one last chance to castle. If he doesn't castle on this move, I'm going to mate him. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it. All right, it's I gave him too many chances. I'm gonna checkmate this guy. He doesn't like to castle his king. I have to checkmate him. Guys, please castle your king and don't be like this guy. Where is he from? Malaysia. If someone's king is in the center and your king is out the center, what should we do? We should open the center. Let's hit him with pawn to e5. Now, if he takes, I'm just going to take back. And if he moves the knight, he loses the f7 pawn, which means he has to find somewhere for the knight right now. So he took, was expecting that. Now we take back, and the game is now over. 13 moves into the Halloween Gambit. You know, like, he's very kind because for one, I sacrificed the knight, played the Halloween Gambit, and the guy insists. Like his kindness. You can't be playing chess if you're too kind, bro. First, he gave me back the knight. I didn't even work for it. And then all he needed to do was castle his king. Didn't castle the king. So now he plays c5. And first of all, the position is equal, which means if I take the knight, he takes my queen, I take his queen. I'm ahead by an entire piece. I want more though. Well, I want more, but I don't think I can get more. But let's check to see if more is there first. Queen f4? I mean, queen f4 is not too bad. Queen f4, because if he moves the knight, then I take the bishop. I still win a piece, and I keep the queens on the board. There's bishop to b5 check, but he's gonna block with a bishop. And then once he blocks with the bishop, that's kind of weird. So if takes, I'm winning because I'm ahead by a piece. But whenever you're attacking someone, especially if you're attacking this guy in particular, you want to keep the attacking pieces on the board. So we're still gonna take the knight. So let's assume that we're gonna take the knight on the next move. And if he moves the knight, we take the bishop. Pawn to g5. Knowing him, he may play pawn to g5. If pawn g5, pawn g5, I'll still take the knight and I'm still going to be ahead by a piece, but I'm probably not going to take the knight. I'm probably going to pull the queen back to, nah. Because if I pull the queen to f2, there's knight e4. Let's see, he's not going to play g5. I think he's going to castle no. I think no, he's going to castle when it's just completely too late. Okay, he didn't castle. He pulls the bishop back, which means we win the knight and we get to keep the queens on the board. So, and by the way, don't be one of those guys who is ahead in material and don't trade queens off the board. Only decline trading the queens off the board if you're attacking someone. So here's what I'm seeing now. That's a free pawn, by the way. But the queen and the king is on the same line. And knowing this guy, he's just not going to castle his king. So I'm thinking of just putting my bishop somewhere. I'm thinking a3. And hit him with rook to e1 next move. Yeah, let's do it. Okay, let's do it. Like, for some reason, I'm not sure if that's the most active square for my bishop, but I need to get my pieces in the game, especially this rook. I need to get this rook. He castles. Look at that. He castled his king. That's kind of crazy. I wasn't expecting him to castle. What do I do now? So I'm attacking this once. He's guarding it once. Hit him with rook to e1, bishop to e6, trade. Hmm. I want more. Let's go rook to b1. Let's go rook to b1. One thing I want you guys to keep in mind when it comes to attacking someone's king, and I've said this a lot. Try to attack the pawns and the squares that is only guarded by the king. With that being said, I'm trying to attack c7 and b7 and b8. So bishop to c6 was played, and okay, I'm thinking of checking because that's just a free pawn. Bishop to a6 was my initial idea, by the way. And then if he takes, I go rook to b8, checkmate. But let's just give this check. The reason why I'm going to check his king like this is because I want to play bishop to c5. And okay, yeah, if he blocks with the queen, there's queen takes. If he blocks with the bishop, okay, he didn't do that. He decides to move the king. And this is now just a free pawn because the queen guards the bishop. So let's take, now I'm ahead by a full 3 points. And I'm also not seeing how I'm going to be checkmating his king. So, okay, if he offers a queen trade, now we're going to accept the queen trade. Okay, he moves the queen to c7. What I'm seeing is the queen is on the same diagonal as the king. So I want to play bishop f2, bishop g3. I'm also thinking of playing queen to f2, attacking a7. And then if he plays b6, I sack, check, block with the bishop, and then just checkmate him on b7. So that's the two plans. I'm gonna go with this one though, because I'm trying not to play hope chess. Like if I pull the bishop back, he's gonna notice. That's what I'm trying to do. And I already told you guys that we're trying to attack the pawns and the squares that is around the opponent's king. So if he plays pawn to a6, then he's no longer guarding the dark square on b6. So he plays b6, and what do we do now? We sack. And by the way, I want you guys to keep in mind that there is a algorithm that you can use to find the best move. You know, it's the checks, the captures, the threats. It's to move on the opponent's half of the board. So, for example, that's a capture, and this is now a skewer, which means he has to take. Then I'm going to take on b6 with check, and yeah, this attack will conclude the game. And I also want you guys to notice that, or not notice, but just know I'm not really seeing how I'm going to checkmate his king. I just know certain things about chess. For example, there's something that my coach told me when he says, for a successful attack to work, you need at least three pieces. You need one piece to sacrifice and then two to mate. In this position, I already sacrificed a piece and I have what? Four pieces to mate. So now that the king goes to c8, he's also making it way easier for me. Bishop to a6 check, the king runs to d7. So what am I going to do? I'm going to check him on f5 first. Once I check him on f5, okay, let me think. Because I was about to say, once I check him on f5, anything that he puts on d7 allows bishop a6. But if he puts the rook on d7, bishop a6, the king runs. So let's think. Queen f5, rook d7, bishop a6, king d8. Maybe I'm rushing it. I should not rush it. Let's go rook to b8. I don't want to be rushing it. Yeah, let's just go rook to b8, doubling up on the b file, which means after the check on f5, some rook to b8 idea is going to be there, and bishop a6 will still be an idea. Rook to g8 is actually a very nice move because now he's counter-attacking my g2 pawn. So if I'm not careful, I'm going to be the one who's defending. So now if I play queen to f5 check, he blocks with the rook. Uh, Queen f5, blocks with the rook, bishop a6, king d8, queen b8, king e7, maybe swing this rook back to e1 with check. That's what I'm going to go with. Let's go queen f5 check. And by the way, if he decides to block with the bishop, bishop a6 is going to win his queen or at least lead to a checkmate. So he has to find rook to d7 or queen to d7. I didn't see queen to d7, but what move am I going to play here? Notice how the queen is pinned to the king. And because the queen is pinned to the king and pinned pieces does not protect, it means the queen is not guarding the bishop on c6. And if the queen is not guarding the bishop on c6, I'm able to take on c6, and that's just a checkmate. More Halloween Gambit against 1,400 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,400. Some more Halloween Gambit. Okay, so this one decides to play knight f6, which is fine. He attacks my pawn. I'm just going to guard it. Now the two knights comes out. Then we sack on e5. So once he takes pawn d4, and he's going to be right into the Halloween. So he took the knight. Let's go d4. Knight now has to move. Some people tries to give back the knight. For example, bishop b4. This is an interesting move, but let's just take the knight. I mean, he didn't have me working for the knight, and then he decides to give up his bishop for a knight. But let's just take. Maybe he thinks he's cooking something. But look what's about to hit him. Just look what's about to hit him. You notice how he took on e4, right? Thinking, okay, I gave back the piece. I took on e4. I doubled up your pawns on c3. But what happens whenever there's more than one unprotected pieces on the opponent's position? What do we do? This is how I want you guys to be thinking. Hit him with queen to g4. Not only am I hitting the knight, I'm hitting the pawn on g7. Well, I'm not even sure what he has to do. Maybe pawn to d5 to protect the knight, grab the pawn on g7, move the rook, bishop h6. He's about to lose an exchange. Yeah, I gave you the knight Don't try to give me back the knight too quickly. Let me work for the knight. So now he plays pawn d5. Yes, my queen is under attack. The plan was to take on g7 anyways. Now I'm ahead by a pawn. Not only am I ahead by a pawn, once he moves his rook to f8, notice how I'm attacking the rook once. He's guarding once and he's guarding with the king. What do we see about attacking the opponent's king? Attack the pawns and squares that is around the opponent's king. Hit him with bishop to h6, which means once we take the rook on f8, it's not going to be a free rook, assuming that he's going to play queen to e7. But once we take the rook and the queen takes, if we trade everything off the board, I'm just going to be ahead by maybe about 3 points. But let's not rush it because the rook is not going anywhere. Am I able to do something else, something better? Bishop to d3, there's knight takes. Yeah, I'm expecting to lose that pawn anyways. Then I should be able to take the pawn on h7. Maybe pawn c4, definitely not pawn c4. So it has to be bishop to d3, just to have an ounce of patience. Yeah, let's go bishop to d3 first. We're going to take the rook. The rook has nowhere to go. Remember what I'm telling you guys. If if you have a threat and the opponent literally has nothing to do, he has to just sit there and be like, take my rook. The rook has nowhere to go. Don't be too jumpy. Oh, I'm able to take the rook. Let me take the rook. Nah. The fact that I'm threatening the rook is better than taking the rook because the threat is better than the execution. So the knight took on c3, was expecting that move. Maybe just castle the king now, just get the king out the center of the board. I mean, that's a pawn, but that's also a dead pawn. And the third is still better than the execution. So let me just get the king out the center of the board. Also, don't try to be too fancy when you're doing this. Like if you genuinely know that it's forced, then you're fine. So for example, bishop e6. I think he's trying to castle his king. If he castle his king, there's still bishop g5 anyways. And then once the queen move, I take and I'm still winning. But I'm about to be ahead by like 3 points. Let's not be fancy. You see, there's a thin line between the 30 is better than the execution and just being too fancy. If you're just being too fancy and you got something to take and you didn't take it, then that's your wrongdoing. Now I'm ahead by 3 points, and I'm trying to grab another pawn. Like I want to play f4, f5, hit the bishop, but I'm trying to take this pawn first, to be honest. So let's just grab the pawn, pull the knight back, push the pawns up the board, and I should be completely winning. I'm not afraid of any checks. If he checks on e2, I just need to move the king out the way. So he moves this king, and as we said, let's pull the bishop back, roll the f pawn up the board, and this is just a winning endgame. So pawn to d4 was played, which means there are two pieces attacking my pawn on a2. Yeah, I don't want to give him that pawn. So let's just play pawn a3 for now. The plan is still to march the f pawn up the board. I just don't want to be too kind. So rook to g8 was played. The rook is on the same line as my king. Need to be a bit careful. Think I should still be able to play f4 because if he plays bishop to h3, rook to f3 guards it, and it's not like he has anything anyways. So let's just continue with the plan. Pawn to f4. Bishop to d5 is also something, but I'm still gonna play rook to f2 and just defend everything. And we're in the end game, so the goal is to roll the pass pawns up the board anyways. Not gonna lie though, if I'm able to like trade the bishops off the board or even giving up my bishop for the knight, I'd be happy with that. Pawn c5 is also not bad because he wants to push and then, my bishop is not gonna be the happiest. But rook e1, pawn f5, bishop here, pull the bishop back, roll the pawns up the board. Should be a plan. Yeah, let's just go with rook to e1. Let's put the rook on the same line as the queen. And once he plays pawn c4, I go bishop f5, maybe bishop h3. So let's go bishop f5. I'm ahead by 3 points. So something in my brain is like, bro, the guy has compensation, but I'm ahead by 3 points. Like, there's nothing here. Also, I should be able to play rook to d2 and eventually win the pawn on d4, but I don't want to rush it. So pawn b5, he's playing with the right plan. By the way, pawn to g4, I also like pawn g4, then rook d2. Pawn g4, pawn a5, rook d2. Yeah, yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Let's go pawn g4 first. And if he plays a5, then rook d2 attack the pawn because we're in the end game and the goal is to attack the pawns. This pawn is actually very weak. Pawn d3, if I take stakes, I'm not going to be able to take with the bishop, though. That's the thing. So pawn a5, as we said, once you're in the endgame, the goal is to attack the pawns. If he pushes the pawn, takes takes, then I'm going to play rook takes, not bishop takes, because I need to keep this pawn guarded. With that being said, I'm going to play pawn to h3 eventually, so that way I'm able to move my bishop around the board. Maybe he still needs to push, just to try to get a queen on the board. For example, push takes takes takes, b3 takes takes, b2 b1 is something. But luckily, my bishop is on f5, protecting the queening square, which means I'm not worried. And if he push takes and then try to push the a pawn up the board, that's some fairy tale stuff. So push, we take, and then once he takes, we take. If he push, I don't believe in that. That's unless he push knight down. Damn, he's really going for that. Yo, he's actually going for that. Let's take though. I mean, this was the plan anyways. Let's take. That's not bad. And then he push. So the plan from here is to push knight down queen. Push knight down queen. If I attack the knight, he pushes, and if I take c queen. Hmm. Hmm. Okay, I'm ahead by 5 points. I want to sacrifice back something. I want to sacrifice back something. What am I going to sacrifice though? Let's start by playing rook. Oh my god. If I play rook to a1, knight to e2, that's a fork. So I have to play king to f2 first. And then if he push, then I go rook to a1. Because he's threatening to play knight b1. So now I go rook to a1. Maybe he's going to go rook to a8, and the guy has counterplay. I'm not gonna lie, like the guy has counterplay. Luckily, I'm ahead by 5 points. So even if I sacrifice my rook for the pawn, I'm still gonna be ahead by a point. Rook to a8 was the move that I was not comfortable with, but I think I have something here. Sack the rook. If the knight takes, hit him with bishop to e4 because the knight and the rook is going to be on the same diagonal. The knight also has no checks on my queen. The king is not able to guard the knight. If the rook guards the knight, I take the knight. And then once the rook takes the knight, I take on a2. And I'm just going to be ahead by at least 12 pawns. So let's go with that. I also want you guys to really learn something from what I just did. Like whenever you have extra material, like a lot of material, you need to be able to simplify the game. This is called simplification. It's very important because, okay, I'm just going to take the knight and win the game. So he has to guard the knight. And once I trade the pieces off the board, oh, I thought I said the king is not able to guard the knight. What was I thinking? The king clearly guards the knight. I'm fine though. I think I should still be fine. I'm not going to take just yet. We spoke about this. Whenever you're pinning someone, wait, wait. Let's think actually. Didn't see that at all. Let's think. Let's think. So takes is weird. If I play king up, there's this rook to a3 move. So I think I'm just gonna push my pawn up the board. And then once he moves the rook, then I take, and then I try to just push the pawn up the board. And then if the rook takes this pawn, I take this pawn. Yeah, let's try that. Let's push the pawn up the board. I'm ahead by 3 points. 3 points. And I'm not able to check here because he's just gonna take this pawn. I could check with the bishop, but that's not the whole point of what I'm trying to do. And he's finding the moves. Rook to a3. The guy's finding the move. So basically, he's now trying to get out of the pin. Now that he's trying to get out of the pin, now we take on d5 with check. And then once the king takes, the plan is to push the pawn, but the king is in the square, man. I need to sacrifice one of these pawns. This pawn is so annoying. Okay, change a plan. Let's roll the H pawn up the board. Pass pawns must. Okay, now I see what he's trying to do. He's trying to play king c3, king b2, and then he's gonna force me to sack my rook. But that should be a bit slow. If I push king here, I push. And if king here, I sack, then I queen, which means if I push, the king can't catch the pawn anymore. So he has to go back with the rook. Okay, this is losing. This was a good game, though. I'm not going to lie. This was a good game because once I play pawn to b7, the rook is not able to go back to a8 because I'm going to take. And if the king goes here, before I queen, I'm going to sack my rook for the pawn and I'm going to have a queen on the board. This was a good game, though. And the opponent resigns. More Halloween against 1,500 players. Stick around. The opponent is now 1500. Pawn e5, let's hit the pawn. Okay, so he's playing the Petrov defense, but it's going to transpose. So if they decide to counterattack your pawn, it's going to be the same thing once you play knight c3. Because no, once the knight goes to c6, it's not transposition. Scare them with the Halloween gambit. And okay, if they don't take the knight, then we're just going to be ahead by a pawn. Took the knight, hit him with d4, and this is where it begins. Are we going to see knight c6 or knight g6? Knight went back to g6, and as we said, if the knight goes back to g6, we play e5 and attack this knight. And because the knight will just have nowhere to go, it has to go back to the back rank, and that's when we hit them with the move bishop to c4, applying a lot of pressure to f7. Okay, pawn to d6 was played. That's a decent move. And I'm thinking of going immediate queen to f3. Queen to f3 is usually our main idea in these types of situation. Queen f3, queen e7, knight d5 hits the queen back to c8. All right, let's go ahead and play queen to f3. Let's hit the pawn on f7. And in this position, I'm expecting queen to e7. Queen to d7 is also a move, but let's see. Okay, he plays bishop to e6. Now, this looks like a natural move, but he's actually about to fall for a trap. Now, look on this. Yes, he's attacking my bishop. Yes, my bishop is hanging. We don't protect the bishop. He left the pawn on b7 unprotected. Moving the pawn from c8 to e6 is actually a drawback mistake. We're going to be taking the pawn on b7, and that's a free pawn. And if he thinks I blundered my bishop, it's actually completely bad for him because I'm going to hit him with queen c6, checking the king, grab back my bishop, and white will actually be better in that position. Okay, he didn't take it. He didn't decide to take it. So how are we going to do this? He decides to play the move knight to e7, which means he's preventing my queen from going to c6. So knight b5 is the regular thematic business, trying to take on c7. Knight b5, there's rook c8. I'm also thinking of bishop to b5 because it's a check and we need to consider the checks. Bishop b5, there's bishop d7, I takes, there's king takes. And then pawn takes hit the knight. Pawn takes is not possible. So and then he's not gonna play king takes. So it's between knight to b5 or just bishop to b5. But I'm going to go ahead and play bishop to b5 because it's a forcing move. It's usually best to play the moves that are more forcing. Now, pawn c6 is also something that I'm expecting. Now, one thing that you guys need to keep in mind about the Halloween gambit is you're not going to be down by a whole lot of material. Like you're sacrificing your knight, but you already took a pawn for it. So, for example, I'm only down by 1 point. So the fact that he just played pawn c6, I'm now just going to take the pawn on c6. And once I take the pawn on c6 and then take back the knight, the position is actually equal. So even though I don't have that extra piece, I have a lot of pawns for compensation. Now my queen is under attack. Obviously have to move. I'm going to put the queen on e4, just putting the queen on the same line as the king, which means I'm actively threatening to take on d6, check the king, win whichever piece that he uses to block. So I'm expecting him to take on e5 here. That's probably the best and the only move. So he did decide to take on e5, and his idea from here is just to develop the bishop and get castled. I'm trying not to make it as easy for him. But let's just take on e5. I mean, we're not down by any material or anything, so we don't have to try to rush to win the game. If he find the very simple idea, which is to develop his bishop and castle. Okay, what was I thinking? I was thinking about just developing my bishop and castle. I was also thinking of the same thematic h4, h5 idea. So if I go h4, there's knight takes h4. That's the thing. If I go, okay, let's just get the king out the center of the board, actually. The question is, where do we put the bishop? Is it d2 then? Oh, it's actually e3. Has to be e3. Because once we put the bishop on e3, the moment we castle, our rook is going to be on the same file as the queen. So let's get our rook out the center of the board. And White is comfortable here, by the way. Like, I don't want you guys to be in this position and be like, okay, I need to ensure that I find a way to win or trick my opponent because I'm down by a piece. Like, the position is equal, bro. Like, we have like a million pawns. The guy only has four, and he's the one that is defending. This is more than enough compensation. So he plays queen to c8. He moves his queen off the same line as my rook. I'm thinking of going knight d5 to attack this, but it's already guarded. I'm really assuming he's going to play the move bishop to f5. And there's not really much I can do about bishop f5 or even bishop c6. So I'm probably going to play h4. Yeah, let's just go ahead and hit him with h4. If bishop to c6 or bishop f5, I'm just going to find somewhere to put my queen and then continue to launch my pieces in his face. So bishop to f5 was played. Queen to f3 loses to bishop to g4, by the way. Queen to d5, there's rook to d8. Can't go queen c4. So by using the process of elimination, it is queen all the way over to a4. And the good thing is, bishop back to d7 doesn't really help him. So I'm assuming he's going to play rook to d8. You know, he's trying to trade pieces off the board. And I'm going to hit him with pawn to h4. One thing I did not tell you guys was the fact that moving my queen actually left the pawn unprotected. How did I miss that? I'm not sure. But let's see. How do we continue from here? I like the idea of playing knight d5. I also like the idea of playing rook d5 to attack the knight. But we have to be as aggressive as possible. So let's start by playing knight to d5. Let's attack the unprotected bishop, threatening some forks. I'm thinking to continue to push the pawns up the board. I'm now down by a point, by the way, because I forgot that my pawn was hanging on e5. But I should still be doing fine. I think my pieces are more active than his. I think he's going to go rook to e8 here, though. Okay, so here's what's happening. He pulls the bishop back to d8, which means he's kind of undeveloping his position. The knight here is unprotected, but I have to be careful because if I move my queen, I could be getting mated on c2. I want to just continue with my attack, though. Like, we have to attack. Let's play h5. We're continuing with the attack. Knight c4. You see, this guy's like, hey, offense is the best defense. I'm not going to defend. I'm going to counterattack your bishop. It's not a bad move, sir. That's not a bad move. So there's two things that I'm thinking here. Hit him with pawn to h6, allow him to take, then I take, hit the rook, and then once the king takes, his king is exposed, take on e3, hits the bishop, and, you know, I should have an attack there. Or just play bishop to d4 with the idea of playing h6. Like, personally, I don't want to trade, but something is telling me that I have to play h6 right now. So let's continue with the plan. Let's play pawn to h6. Obviously, he's not going to trade. If he plays pawn to g6, then I go bishop to d4, and his dark squares are going to be weak. So that's why I actually didn't want to allow him to take on e3, because I wanted to keep my dark squared bishop. But if he takes on e3, I take on g7 first and attack his rook. Oh my God. Oh my God, look what the 1500 player just did. He just made the worst drawback mistake. The bishop was chilling on d8. This was like the most important piece on the board. It was the piece that was preventing the fork. Now that he moves the bishop to b6, the e7 square is no longer guarded, bro. That's a queen, sir. Now you have to move the king. Ay, ay, ay. Ay, ay, ay. She moves the king, but before we take the queen, let's take on g7 first, and I'm going to say check. And now that I'm going to say check, is king has to take. And then once the king takes, the king and the rook is now on the same diagonal. Now bishop to h6 is what I'm trying to play. But first, let's take his queen off the board. Okay, he took with the correct rook. That's the correct rook to take with. All right, how do we continue here? I'm ahead by 5 points. I mean, bishop h6 is still an idea. I'm ahead by so many material. I know I should just be trading the pieces off the board, but if I take pawn takes, my queen is under attack. I'm not really comfortable with that. So I'm actually going to go bishop to d4 and say check. I want to trade, but I want to do it my way because to take is a mistake. If he takes my bishop, then I take on d4. So he took, let's take. His knight is also under attack. I think he has a very nice move. I mean, it's not going to win him the game or anything. But if he plays knight to b6, my queen is going to be under attack, and my c2 pawn is going to be under attack. Now, what I'm thinking of is just sacrificing my. Well, come on, bro. No, bro, that's not it, bro. Okay, now I'm gonna sacrifice my queen because once I play queen takes king takes b2, and he takes on c2 and then I takes bishop takes, I'm going to be ahead by an entire rook. I can't lose a game by an entire rook. And this is what simplification is. Let's take the knight. Sometimes when you're ahead by a lot of pieces, the best way to try to win the game is by sacrificing back some material. So he decided to check the king first, but let's just move the king. And the moment he takes on c2, we're just going to sacrifice and we're going to be ahead by an entire rook. The sack is actually forced, by the way, because if I play king to d1, rook b1 is going to be a checkmate. So he didn't go for that. He plays rook b7. I think he wants to play rook c7, but now I'm thinking of just hitting him with rook c4. Rook c4, there's rook b8, but then I'm just going to put my rook somewhere. The check is not going to do anything for him. So let's go with rook c4. Rook b8. Now all he's trying to do is check here, which means I need to just move my rook off the same line as my king. And then once he checks, I'm going to go king d2. And then if he checks me again, I'm going to block with the rook. Extra 7 points. Everything should be fine here. Okay, he checks. Let's just move the king. He checks again. Let's just block the check. Eventually, he's going to run out of checks. Okay, rook to c8. Now he's attacking c2, but we already discussed this. Like, we don't mind losing the pawn on c2. So let's force him. Let's go rook to f4 and attack the bishop. And then if he takes on c2, we sack. He's not trying to take. So let's go rook to d7. Let's try to put the rooks on the 7th. Maybe he's trying to flag me, but he also has a minute on the clock. Maybe he's going to try rook to b2 to apply more pressure to c2, but that's also going to be blundering the rook. Yeah, he plays rook b2, but he puts his rook on the same line as his king, which means rook to d4 is now a fork. Once he moves the king, we grab the rook, and this is now actually GG's. So I'm just going to assume that he doesn't know where the resign button is. Now I'm just going to take on f7, rook f6. How do we do this? Maybe give a check, maybe just pull the queen back. He pulls the rook back. Now we go queen d5. And the plan is just to gang up on his f7 pawn. Rook e6. All right, let's just roll the pawn up the board. Let's not rush. Let's just create a new queen. It's fine. Okay, let's keep rolling the pawn. Keep rolling the pawn. Keep rolling the pawn. Okay, now once I go here, this is going to be a queen regardless of what he does. Now we promote our queen, check him here, and okay, now I'm just trying to find a checkmate. Maybe give a check. If he blocks the check, that should be mate. If he moves, okay, this is now just mate, which is why he resigns. More Halloween Gambit against 1,600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,600. E5, hit the pawn, some Halloween action, take out the 2 knights. And once the 4 knights are out, we do the Halloween. He quickly took the knight. Now we play pawn to d4. And okay, knight to g6 is what the higher rated players need to play. He found it. Let's go pawn e5. Knight g8 is the best move. And then after bishop c4, pawn d5 is the best move. So usually whenever they play pawn d5, that's the sign that, the opponent knows something what they're doing. But my opponent actually decided to play pawn c6 because he wants to play c6 followed by d5. But that's a bit too slow. Am I able to go queen to f3? No. Queen f3, queen e7, pawn h4, pawn d5, and he's fine. So queen f3, queen e7, castle. Okay, let's start with queen to f3, knowing that if he plays pawn to d5 now, I'm able to empasan and his f7 pawn is going to be hanging, which means he has to play queen to e7. The thing is, once he plays queen e7, pawn to d5 will become a threat. Queen e7, okay, I thought I saw something with knight e4. But if knight e4, there's queen b4, which checks the king, picks up the bishop. That would have been nice, by the way. But let me just get my king out the center of the board. We're down by a piece, but the knight is not developed. The queen is in front of the bishop. He didn't play d5. He decides to play c6. So I have something. And anytime he tries to play d5 and I empasan, I'm going to be able to immediately play rook to e8. But then he decides to play b5. You see, he's trying to be slick, but that's not how it works, son, because my queen is on the same diagonal as your rook, which means, okay, how do I take the pawn? Okay, take the pawn with the knight so that way I'm able to fork. And if he takes, I take the rook. And if he takes another piece, I take another piece. We got him. Knight takes b5. Pinned pieces does not protect. Now he has to defend against both knight c7 and knight d6. You know, he could try king to d8. If king to d8, bishop d2 threatens bishop a5. I think he probably needs to take, like takes, queen takes, pawn takes, check, queen block. Then I take on c4, and then he's losing. But that's the best way. I think he needs to lose. The other losses are worse. Oh, oh. Okay, knight h4 is a knight h4 is a very nice move. I didn't see that move. But let's say I check. If I check, there's king to d8. My queen is still gonna be under attack, and I'm trying to see if I'm able to play something like queen c3. And if he takes my horse, I play queen to a5 check, and then once he moves his king, I start some attack, or just play queen to e4. If queen to e4, there's pawn to f5 though. Hmm. And if I check on d6, he's oh, knight d6 check. That's the move. Because if I check on d6, I thought he's able to sack his queen. But if he sack the queen, I take on f7 check. That's an in-between move. So knight d6, that's the move. And that's a check. So now the king has to go to d8. And after king to d8, I'm thinking about just knight takes f7 fork, but I'm trying not to be too materialistic, especially since he gave me a mini panic attack just now. So I'm going to just go queen c3 and then just checkmate him on a5. If this guy gets checkmate in 10 moves, that's going to be crazy. This is already GG's, by the way. So the king moves to d8. If I check, king moves to c7. Let's not be greedy because if a queen was on a5, that would be a checkmate. So do we play queen to c3 or queen to a3? I don't think it makes a huge difference. I think either way, he's probably going to play pawn to a5, and then I should be able to take on f7. And because I don't want to trade the queens, I think it's best to put the queen on c3. So now I'm threatening queen a5 mate, which means he has to play pawn to a5. Then I check. Maybe I'm not going to check, to be honest. Wait. Bishop g5, queen takes g5, knight f7, royal fork, which means after bishop g5, he has to play f6, and then that's going to be a free knight. Yo, so he has to play a5. You see, this is what I mean by whenever you see a good move, you find a better one. And anytime there's a tactic in the position, I like to remind you guys about the algorithm in which we use to find these types of moves. And it's basically just focus on the opponent's half of the board, focus on your forcing moves, focus on your checks, your captures, your threats. And if you also need to ensure that you're focusing on the opponent's forcing moves as well. Well, he decides to play knight a6. The guy just played knight ace. He didn't even see that was mate. Yo, 1600, checkmate in 13 move. That's just a checkmate. More Halloween Gambit against 1700 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1700. More spooky stuff coming your way. Let's get the two knights out, and then once the four knight comes out, we hit them with knight takes c5, and that's the Halloween Gambit. Knight takes c5, we play d4. Knight back to g6, we play e5, and we're basically chasing the knight all the way back. And whenever you see them playing the moves this fast, they basically know what to do against it. So let's go bishop c4. I'm expecting a very quick pawn to d5 here. Okay, he doesn't know what to do. He plays bishop to b4. Okay, this is actually weird. I'm going to play queen to f3, but for some reason, everybody takes on c3 here. Like, why do they take on c3 if the knight is spinned? No need to take the knight if it's spinned. Let's see though, because it's weird. Everybody does it. I don't know why they do it. I don't know what they see, but they just think like if you're in the situation where you're like, hey, I have to get rid of this knight, at least wait until I attack your bishop or something. Okay, pawn to f6 is pawn to f6 is not it. So if I takes, then I help him develop the knight. So I'm not gonna play that. So let's continue with our regular plan. Pawn to h4. The plan is to play pawn to h5 and chase away the opponent's knight. And obviously, if he takes on e5, that's gonna be a very embarrassing way to lose. So queen to e7 was played. Fair enough. Now I'm going to play pawn to h5, continue to chase the opponent's knight around. Knight goes back to f8, and this is what I like to see. Yeah, that's what I like to see. I'm thinking about h6, but I don't want to help him to get any of his pieces out. Yeah, it's time to get my king out the center of the board. My rook already did what it needed to do on the h file. If he takes, I takes. Queen takes won't be possible due to queen f7. Let's take. He's not able to take because queen f7 is gonna win the knight, probably lead to mate. So he plays pawn c6. I'm I'm gonna win this game. Bishop to g5 is what I'm thinking of. If queen takes g5, queen to f7, check. If king to f8, queen takes f8, check. Um, if king c7, queen d6, check. Okay, it looks attractive, but I don't like it. Why I don't like it though? Bishop g5 takes, check, king over check, king up check, king back to d8, and wait, wait. I'm winning the knight though. I'm winning the knight, right? Bishop to g5, queen takes g5. I check the king, king over, take this knight with check, and then once the king move, my bishop takes the g8 knight. Spooky stuff, man. It's crazy. We got back the piece. It's crazy. And he has to do it. The queen has no more well, technically he could try something like queen c5, but that's weird. I think he's gonna take. I think he's gonna take. But let's see. I think I'm not sure if he's gonna see as far as my bishop taking on g8 in the end. But if he does, then queen c5, I check. Oh no! If he moves the queen, that's mate. He has to take. Wait, he did play queen to c5. It's just a checkmate. More Halloween Gambit against 1800 players. Stick around. Our opponent is in the 1800 region. E5, let's go NF3, hit the pawn. He guards it, knight c3, and the whole idea is to sack the knight. Now we're in the Halloween Gambit. Once he takes, we go pawn to d4, and then from here, we're going to be chasing the knights around. Knight g6, correct move. Let's play pawn e5, hit the knight back to g8, bishop c4, d5 is the best move in this position. Bishop to b4 was played, not d5. So let's go queen to f3. Let's attack the pawn on f7. And then after queen to e7, pawn h4, and we're going to be starting some attack. Why is everybody giving up their bishops for knights? Like, that's not how chess is played. Pawn h4 now, and you're now about to be attacked. And if he takes on h4, I sack the rook, and then he's mated. So he decides to play h6. Okay, h5, there's knight f8. I mean, there's also bishop a3, pawn d6. Okay, let's go h5. Let's go h5, hit the knight, force the knight back to f8, and is g7 pawn is now a weakness. So why not queen to g3? Queen g3, maybe he plays f6 though, that's the thing. So I think it's time to get the king out the center of the board. So once he's pushed one of these pawns, I'm able to open the position. Knight e6 was played. Okay, that's also not bad. I think the knight is heading to g5. But once the knight goes to g5, pawn to f4 is what I'm going to play. So queen to g3, queen g3 followed by f4 is the plan anyways. So let's start. Yeah, let's start by playing queen g3. I want to play f4, f5. Now, in some cases, I'm threatening to take the knight and then take the pawn on g7. But if I take the knight, he takes with the f pawn and the queen guards the g7 pawn. The queen went back to f8, and I'm not going to lie. I think I'm living this is like the dream. of all Halloween Gambit players. Like the guy's just not developing his pieces. I'm thinking D5 to hit the knight, but the knight gets the C5 square. So let's go F4 with the idea of playing F5. And yes, we're we're gonna continue to chase those knight around. There's no G6 because I'm just gonna take. Okay. Oh, pawn F5. Pawn F5 is not bad enough. Pawn F5 is not a bad move. Pawn F5 is not bad at all. I think I have to en passant though. I think I have to en passant because I need the position to be open. Okay, let me think first. Let me just not panic. If I takes knight takes pawn F5. Yeah, has to be that. Pawn D5, there's knight C5, and I don't see it. So let's take. I didn't see F5, to be honest. I didn't see F5, but naturally, I just know that I have to be the one who opens the position. If knight takes, I play F5. If he takes this pawn, then he's giving me back the piece with queen G6 check. If queen takes, there's F5. I'm just gonna play F5 next, regardless of what he plays. Well, he decided to take with the pawn. I was not expecting that move either, because if now I play F5, there's knight G5, and the knight is permanently placed on G5. Or I'm gonna play F5, still gonna play F5 because it opens this diagonal towards my queen. So not only does it open this file towards this king, wait, do I check first? No, 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 no. We take on C7. I'm chill. I'm actually very chill here because once I play rook to E8, he has to block with the knight. And then I'm able to play bishop to A3 and apply pressure to the pin piece. Or I get rid of the knight so that way when I check, he's not able to block with anything. Okay, queen to e7 actually concludes the game. I think he wants to play queen d8 and trade off the attackers, but I just automatically saw that the queen and the king is on the same line, and it means I'm going to play rook to e1, and I'm not able to play rook to e1 because my rooks are not connected, which means once I take the knight, one could say that's a free knight. I don't know. This is losing because if he takes the bishop, I'm gonna play rook e1. If he doesn't take the bishop, I'm still gonna play rook e1. So he took the bishop. Now rook e1 pins the queen, and yeah, it's now GG's. So he sacked the queen. Let's take with check. King has to move, and now I'm just going for some checkmates. Check here. King goes here. Yeah, yeah. Let's check here first. Force the king here. Check, knight takes, check. Wait. Check, knight takes, check. King has to go here. Then I check. King has to take. Then I grab the rook. I think it leads to some checkmate. It would have actually been way better to just take the knight, then play rook to e7. I don't know why I'm trying to be fancy, but this also works. I think the other way was better though. Now he plays king to h6, which means now we're going to take the knight. You see, now everybody's gonna comment that I missed checkmating one. Everybody's gonna be like, bro, you missed mating one. I hate those comments. But it's gonna be made soon. No, it actually wasn't made because the king would have took here anyways. But now we're able to play bishop f5, which is a check, which means I'm gonna be able to take his rook. And yeah, now his king is I'm sure I had some checkmate somewhere there. But one b4, where's my mate? That's my checkmate. Wait, no, that's not mate. Oh, backside, it's embarrassing. Where's my mate? No, that's just a checkmate. More Halloween against 1900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1900. Let's keep scaring people with the Halloween gambit. So it starts with the two knights game, and then they play the four knights game, and then we surprise them with knight takes e5. It's very scary, which is why it's called the Halloween gambit. So he took the knight, but this is where the pawns will start to attack the knights. And remember, there's knights back to c6 and there's knight back to g6. We're still going to be pushing either of the pawns. For example, whenever they choose to put the knight back to g6, we play e5. And then once we hit them with e5, the knight has to go back to g8. And then once the knight goes back to g8, we play bishop c4, and the whole plan from here is to start applying as much pressure as possible to their position. The best move here is d5, by the way, which is not easy to see. Bishop to b4 was played. I mean, decent move. It's pinning my knight. Now, what happens if I play the move queen to f3? Queen to f3 threatens the f7 pawn, forces queen to e7, castle the king, force him to give up the bishop for the knight, and then it's just a chess game. Another move that I'm thinking of is actually pawn to h4. Pawn to h4. Okay, let's start with queen to f3 first. Like it's gonna be crazy. This queen to f3 is also a very thematic move. It's not like we're trying to say, okay, hopefully he doesn't see that we're threatening something. It's just that it's hard for him to defend. Like queen e7 is the only move here. So he did find queen e7. I would like to play knight d5, but my knight is being pinned, which is why I'm considering castle. But the move pawn to h4 is way more aggressive because the plan from here is just to play the move pawn to h5 and chase the knight away. Ah, okay. He sacrificed the knight. We're gonna be seeing a lot of this, by the way. Like a lot of person is just gonna be like, you know what? I've had enough. You could take back the knight. But the thing is, whenever they sacrifice the knight, it doesn't harm us. You know, for example, look on this. Queen takes e5. His queen and his king is on the same line. The natural move for me to play is bishop to e3. But then if I play bishop e3, there's takes, queen takes, he hits the queen, hits my bishop, which is why I'm gonna play the unnatural king to d1. I'm not able to get castled, but because the queen and the king is on the same line, not only am I threatening to play queen takes f7, I'm also threatening to play rook to e1. He pulls the queen back to f6, which solves both of his problems. And I'm not thinking of just playing rook to e1 check, to be honest, just to immediately go with my attack. We're definitely not looking to trade any pieces off the board here. Let's go rook to e1 check. And I'm assuming he's going to be blocking the check with the knight. All right, so I don't want to trade queens. That's the thing. But I also don't want to waste any time. So for example, if I play something like queen to e4, it gives him the option of castling. And if we allow him to castle, then that's kind of weird. Knight d5 looks nice, but queen takes f3 is actually a check. And then after takes, he's just going to take or rook. So I am actually gonna trade the queen, not something that I wanted to do because we're down in material. I think he still wants to get his king castled. Castling the king doesn't seem safe, to be honest. I think he also wants to take my knight on c3. So let's go bishop to d2. If he takes, I'm gonna take and attack f6. Now keep in mind, we're still down by a piece. Okay, never mind. He plays pawn to d6. Like, if you're winning, you should try to trade pieces off the board, but pawn to d6, the bishop is not even guarding the knight anymore. So I'm thinking of sacking the rook, then play knight d5, but that's giving up too much material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit him with knight to d5. This is PP on the PP. The knight is pinned, but not only are we applying pressure to this knight, we're also attacking the bishop. And we're threatening to take on c7. And we're threatening to take on f6. Black's position is in shambles. It's the thing about the Halloween gambit is Black has to know what they're doing. And if they don't know what they're doing, they're going to be thinking the whole entire game and they're going to be in trouble. So bishop to e6 was played. Now, here's the thing. Do we want to fork on c7? Do we want to take a free bishop? Yeah, let's not complicate things too much. The guy gave us a free bishop. Let's just take the free bishop. The good thing is my knight on d5 is not hanging because my rook is on e1, which means if he takes with the bishop and I take back, his knight is not going to be able to take. And he's very scared now because he castles the king, but that's just a drawback blunder. The king was the only piece guarding the knight, bro. So not only am I ahead by two, keep in mind we're playing a 1900 players. We're only 16 moves in. That's another free knight. Now the king has to move. We're now ahead by 5 points. Okay, so he plays king to d7. I'm ahead in material. I want to trade, but if I take and he takes, my knight is going to be trapped. So let's just pull the knight back to d5. And I'm not expecting him to trade. I'm the one who should be trading, but I'm also threatening to take on f6, which he gladly allowed. He plays pawn c6, hits the knight. Let's take the free pawn on f6. Now we're ahead by 6 points, and from here, the game is just over and the opponent resigns. More Halloween against 2,000 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 2,000. e5 was played, knight f3, knight c6 hit the. Okay, we're in the. No, this is the four knights game. Yeah, this is the four knights game. Nowhere in the Halloween Gambit. How does a 2000 rated player respond to the Halloween? Yo, I can't believe a 2000 rated player decided to put the knight back to c6. That's kind of crazy to me. But let's play pawn to d5. Now he has to put the same knight back on e5. Now we hit him with f4. And then his knights are now just dancing. His knights are just dancing because now the knight has to go back to g6. Now we hit him with e5. And the knight still has to go back to g8. He's thinking about it, but that's the only score for the knight. There's no forward move that the knight has. Now, knowing 2000 rated players, they usually think about ways to sacrifice back material. But as we've been discussing, once the knight goes back to g8, hit them with pawn to d6, and we're not going to be dominating the dark squares. As you guys could see, our pawns are already controlling a lot of dark squares. The knight is planning on controlling the dark squares. The bishop is coming in the game. What will he play here? So he took the pawn. Let's take back. And the two main moves in this position is either queen to f6 or queen to b6. Because not only am I threatening queen to e7, which will just win back my piece, he also needs to find ways to get his pieces out. So he did decide to play queen to b6, and now we're going to play the thematic move knight to b5. Never forget about this knight b5 move. We threaten to fork, we defend our pawn on d6, and I think he has to play king to d8 here. There's also rook to b8, but yeah, I think he's already in some trouble. So rook to b8 was played. And if I check the king moves, what do I get from that? Not sure. So let's continue with our attack. And then when we talk about attacking, we talk about looking for moves on the opponent's half of the board. So don't forget about this pawn to f5 move. Like you should find a lot of joy in chasing the opponent's pieces around the board, especially the knights. Where is he going to put the knight? If he puts the knight on e5, bishop to f4, and that's another tempo on the knight. Maybe he could try pawn to a6. Okay, bishop, knight to e5. Let's hit him with bishop to f4. All our pieces are now developed. And again, I want you guys to understand how chess works. Don't just count the material and be like, bro, I know that you have this position, but you're down by 2 points. I'm not down by 2 points. It's not about the amount of material that is on the board. It's about what they're doing on the board. Okay, so knight c6 was played. Okay, how do I continue with my attack? I'm in love with knight c7. Okay, it's just queen d2. Queen d2, if a6 hit him with bishop e3, um, and then if the queen moves, knight c7 wins the queen. Okay, check king over knight c7 threaten mate, but he's gonna see that. So let's go queen d2. Pawn to a6 is actually a very natural move, but pawn a6 is not really good. I want to play bishop e3 and attack. Okay, he plays knight f6. He knows how to play some chess. He's trying to get all his pieces in the game. So knight c7, king d8, bishop e3. There's also queen to a5 if bishop e3. And for some reason, I'm not seeing what I get with knight c7. I think it's just castle here. Let's just get the king out the center of the board. Again, we're not trying to win quickly or anything. We're just trying to get all our pieces in the game. Just imagine a bishop is on c4 and a rook is on e1. Every single piece is in the game. The opponent's king is in the center. This rook can't move. This rook can't move. Bishop can't move. You're really going to tell me that I'm the one who is down by a piece? I think black is down by at least 3 pieces here, plus the king in the center of the board. So that's already 6 pieces. So he voluntarily decided to play king to d8 because, he was like anticipating knight to c7 and bishop e3. There's still queen a5. Bishop c4 hits the pawn. So bishop c4, pawn a6, bishop e3, queen a5, takes, knight takes, check. And then once the king moves over, knight c7, and he's going to be in too much trouble. So let's go with, it's actually tricky though. Bishop c4, there's knight e4, which hits the queen. And then knight f2 could be a fork. I don't think I should be worried about a fork though. That's the thing. But I'm trying to think about a square where my queen is going to be very active. Maybe queen e2. Okay, there's no forks. What am I saying? Because if he forks, then I have bishop e3. So let's go bishop c4. If knight e4, there's queen e2, and if he forks, bishop e3, and he's getting forked. So, God, the guy, look on this position. You wouldn't want to get this position? My God. Ha, ha, ha. Pawn to a6 was played. Pawn to a6 weakens the final dark squares that was holding his position together. It's over now. It's completely over. And what move are we going to play? Just a subtle bishop to e3, attacking the queen. First of all, at first glance, he's like, oh no, my queen is trapped. But then he's like, my queen is not trapped. I'm able to play queen a5. But if he plays queen a5, I trade the queens, bishop b6, maybe, oh my God, rookie, this is going to be mate. Yo, I'm just having fun, to be honest. Let's take the queen. That's a check. The knight has to take. Bishop to b6 is another check. The king has to move. And again, I just want to remind you guys on the just how we find the best move in chess. We focus on looking on the forcing moves. These are the checks, or we look on moves on the opponent's half of the board. So how do we continue? Rook to e1 check. Blocks with the bishop. That's a free bishop. I mean, if he blocks with the knight, I just take. Okay, let me think about it. Check, blocks with the bishop, check, king has to move, check, king has to move. He's in trouble. Or do I just check first, force the king to move, check here, force the king to move? Okay, let's start with rook to e1 check. I like rook to e1 check. Maybe I need to take the knight, but I just like rook to e1 check. So he blocks with the bishop. Now if I check, there's king to f8, but then I take with the pawn. Oh, ah, knight c7 check. If king to d8, that's mate. If king to f8, we take on e7, that's a check. The king has to go to g8. And then pawn to e8 is going to be a checkmate. He moves the king, that's a check. The knight has to take, and that's just a checkmate.